Hello and welcome. I'd like to begin this episode of just the observation of content. And this was something that was observed in myself, and something that perhaps is a familiar pattern or a familiar obstacle to being present. When we look at the consumption of content, the availability of content, the accessibility to content, it's almost a recipe for turbulent waters. And what I mean by that is mind energy being stirred, being disturbed. Almost a sort of hyper stimulation of mental energy, whether it's switching from videos to videos, or nowadays you can switch from one music track to another in an instant, one book to another in an instant. One conversation to another. Look at social media. And in the content themselves, there is also disruption. There is also, in a sense, some hyper-stimulation. There is a lot of content. There's this energy to keep hold of the mind. I was watching a travel vlog on YouTube, and there was all of these beautiful shots, but there was sudden changes. There was zooming into this, there was sudden music, and I could sense the disturbance within myself watching. And perhaps this is across the board with certain things, with certain energies, that where creation happens, but maybe there isn't as much connection to their true self, to awareness. And it's almost as if the egoic creation is now trying its best to keep the mind entertained. And this could be for our, applications on our phones, or on content we watch and observe on our computers. Perhaps it's something you can be aware of certain things where the mind may love it, it enjoys it, it wants more of it, more change, it wants to keep. It's to keep those bubbles going, and it needs more movement, more change to keep that if you use the analogy of water, the disturbed water, the white bubbles, the foam, when water is, look at waves, constant movement of water, it wants that to remain. And content that's been created with perhaps an absence of connectivity in oneself, then there is a huge, you can almost taste the egoic energy, like something that may have too much sugar, that's too sweet. But only if there is presence within you, then perhaps there's a detection of turbulence or stimulation, or it becomes aware of it. If you're not there, then you're already on the roller coaster, enjoying that ride. And as well as content, our behaviors as well, whether it's a big problem with our devices we have. I listened recently I was watching and listening to a podcast, and one of the people on there were talking about an app to help their addiction on their phones. So there was almost an app that records the usage on the phones and lets them know when they're using it too much. And this mirrors the energy of a lot of content that is out there. So the device is almost trying to keep the mind engaged, the restless mind. Perhaps when you switch to another song, or flick from video to video, or pick up the phone, perhaps you may catch yourself to say, is this a conscious change? Am I consciously, or is the mind bored and restless and on autopilot? You're just flicking through. In some ways, when there was vinyls or CDs, then perhaps this energy was a lot less, where in order to switch an album, or if there's DVDs or videotapes, to switch that over and put it in, rewind it or whatever, it almost slows you down, it slows the mind down. But now, this almost with the ability, the accessibility of content, devices, it keeps that mind in that hyper-stimulated state, and it takes time to, it can take time to come down from that. And I've noticed in myself, the more there is a sort of rested awareness, a rested alertness, then these things are recognized, and you can choose what content that's consciously consumed, what you feel is good for our mental state, good for our sense of peace, and what is no longer serving us. So it's just to notice that a constant going from here to there, whether it's on content, whether it's behaviors on our phones, reaching for things. Nowadays there's phones, tablets, computers, laptops, of course, and then on each of those there's more and more applications. There's watches as well. There's think it's called a Fitbit. There's all sorts of, and no device is good or bad. It's just the becoming aware of what we consciously do. Sometimes the awareness comes later when we've engaged in loads of apps and this and that. We've checked our watch 10 times in the last few minutes, or our phones that are engaging us sometimes with the ping of a tweet or a message, or that must be checked now. You might be enjoying a conversation, you might be in nature, you might just be having a morning of quietness, and you may have reached a depth of peace that sometimes it may have taken a bit of time to submerge, to quiet the mind, and suddenly a ping, and then you're back out again in the restlessness of the mind. So what can we do? We can start with the fundamental step of, am I aware in the present moment? In this moment, am I aware? And it's a great support to begin there. And it may not stop the behavior. You may still go ahead and watch whatever sort of trending news or articles or Twitter, Instagram videos, or YouTube, or whatever content that's consumed. But that perhaps maybe there's a slight pause, and maybe you won't watch as much as you would usually do. Maybe the time spent would be less. You may say, oh, that's all I need. I can put the phone down. Or you may catch yourself reaching, or catch yourself changing the music, changing or loading up a video, scrolling, another scroll, to look at more opinions of, more thoughts of people that are instantly put out into the world for everyone. And you may think, oh, don't need to scroll anymore. Okay. Yeah, perhaps as something you can do is actively engage. If it's something that serves you like in some way, perhaps you can put your attention more into it, whether it's watching the latest video somebody has posted, or a tweet somebody. You can read it with full attention, watch or listen with full attention, without the thought of wanting more, or perhaps being aware of that itch of wanting more. And when that finishes, perhaps leave a space if you do want to switch again or watch another video, or perhaps pause what you're doing, put the phone down a moment and just, okay, I'll take a few conscious breaths before I decide if I want to look at or consume any more of that content. So just a couple of small things that may bring about a little bit of space in this fluctuating change that's all around us, that's calling us in every moment. of course you know yourself, so perhaps there could be some tailoring involved in certain things that you would like to change or bring more conscious awareness to. This can be tailored to assist you. Another thought that has arisen before recording today was the simplicity of actually stepping into presence. It's been mentioned before, the subtlety of mind that can take you away, even a mind that wants to be spiritual, or a mind that it's still very subtly, it still carries you away from the present moment, with the thought of, I can be spiritual in a little bit. Let me just look at this important tweet or an important video first. And even spiritual content, you may be watching one spiritual video after another, one spiritual book, one more page, but you may not be present. You may be in the mind may have taken over, saying, "Oh, just read some more." Yes, read some more. Stay there in the thought of being in the present moment, the thought of being spiritual. It's so subtle, it almost doesn't feel like it's a thought. It's just a habit of watching another video and then going back to what you were doing, but without actually following the breath with complete attention. So this links into that the turbulent content, almost, where it makes it a challenge to suddenly just be completely aware, a singular awareness of the present moment, because the lifestyle today, we're constantly barraged with content, and you can add the complication of relationships, people wanting your attention. So you're constantly in this turbulent, like I talk about water bubbling, and you're constantly in this, and so when it comes down to just simply being aware, perhaps in a formal meditation, it may give you an opportunity, because then you're consciously silencing things, putting things down, constantly putting yourself in an environment that supports simply being aware, the singularity awareness. But it may not support it if you are outside of that. And so with just knowing the conditions of the mind, being aware, witnessing, observing. So it's not about rules and doing this and not doing that, but just becoming aware, just looking, and looking without judgment. Many of us may come across where suddenly we catch ourselves in unconsciousness, and sometimes there can be a reaction to that. Oh, And you may feel that frustrated breath, so this is where compassion can come in, self-compassion of acceptance, of asking yourself the question, okay, what do I need in this moment? So you're immediately switching to a sort of compassionate state, and a question that can perhaps remedy the situation, where you're not continuing on to the reaction, the narrative, I should have done this, and so on. So just a few thoughts there about content, about the fragmented energies of mind that the current environment is encouraging, wanting your attention. And of course the simplicity of that wholeness, that lightness of singular being aware of just the present moment, the absence of turbulence. So now the serene calmness of that water, the lake, and the awareness of that sereneness. Perhaps a useful question you can ask is, am I aware of the state of my mind? And it may be a useful question where you have to almost step outside of mind to observe, to step outside of the rapids of the mental energies that's taking you this way and that way, to watch this, to look at that, do this, do that, and immediately you can step out of that and just look and observe. Perhaps for those of us who didn't grow up with phones and such, it may be a little bit easier to become aware. But for those nowadays, we're getting the devices earlier and earlier in life. It may be second nature to check the phone without really knowing that you're doing that behavior, that you're going into this, that you're carrying it around with you and constantly fretting that it's still with you. Is it checking your pockets? Yep, it's still there. Putting it on a table in front of you so it's there whenever you need it. So we move on to a new earth. We are at the passage that's titled Stillness. It has been said, stillness is the language God speaks, and everything else is a bad translation. Stillness is really another word for space. Becoming conscious of stillness whenever we encounter it in our lives, will connect us with the formless and timeless dimension within ourselves, that which is beyond thought, beyond ego. It may be the stillness that pervades the world of nature, or the stillness in your room in the early hours of the morning, or the silent gaps in between sounds. Stillness has no form. That is why, through thinking, we cannot become aware of it. Thought is form. Being aware of stillness means to be still. To be still is to be conscious without thought. You are never more essentially, more deeply yourself than when you are still. When you are still, you are who you were before you temporarily assumed this physical and mental form called a person. You are also who you will be when the form dissolves. When you are still, you are who you are beyond your temporal existence, consciousness, unconditioned, formless, eternal. So we've reached chapter 9, which is titled Your Inner Purpose. As soon as you rise above mere survival, the question of meaning and purpose becomes of paramount importance in your life. Many people feel caught up in the routines of daily living that seem to deprive their life of significance. Some people believe life is passing them by or has passed them by already. Others feel severely restricted by the demands of their job and supporting a family, or by their financial or living situation. Some are consumed by acute stress, others by acute boredom. Some are lost in frantic doing, others are lost in stagnation. Many people long for the freedom and expansion that prosperity promises. Others already enjoy the relative freedom that comes with prosperity and discover that even that is not enough to endow their lives with meaning. There is no substitute for finding true purpose. But the true or primary purpose of your life cannot be found on the outer level. It does not concern what you do, but what you are, that is to say, your state of consciousness. So the most important thing to realize is this: your life has an inner purpose and an outer purpose. Inner purpose concerns being and is primary. Outer purpose concerns doing and is secondary. While this book speaks mainly of your inner purpose, this chapter and the next will also address the question of how to align outer purpose and inner purpose in your life. Inner and outer, however, are so intertwined that it is almost impossible to speak of one without referring to the other. Your inner purpose is to awaken. It is as simple as that. You share that purpose with every other person on the planet because it is the purpose of humanity. Your inner purpose is an essential part of the purpose of the whole, the universe and its emerging intelligence. Your outer purpose can change over time. It varies greatly from person to person. Finding and living in alignment with the inner purpose is the foundation for fulfilling your outer purpose. It is the basis for true success. Without that alignment, you can still achieve certain things through effort, struggle, determination, and sheer hard work or cunning. But there is no joy in such endeavour, and it invariably ends in some form of suffering. The next passage is titled Awakening. Awakening is a shift in consciousness in which thinking and awareness separate. For most people, it is not an event but a process they undergo. Even those rare beings who experience a sudden, dramatic, and seemingly irreversible awakening will still go through a process in which the new state of consciousness gradually flows into and transforms everything they do, and so becomes integrated into their lives. Instead of being lost in your thinking, when you are awake, you recognize yourself as the awareness behind it. Thinking then ceases to be a self-serving, autonomous activity that takes possession of you and runs your life. Awareness takes over from thinking. Instead of being in charge of your life, thinking becomes the servant of awareness. Awareness is conscious connection with universal intelligence. Another word for it is presence, consciousness without thought. The initiation of the awakening process is an act of grace. You cannot make it happen, nor can you prepare yourself for it or accumulate credits toward it. There isn't a tidy sequence of logical steps that leads toward it, although the mind would love that. You don't have to become worthy first. It may come to the sinner before it comes to the saint, but not necessarily. That's why Jesus associated with all kinds of people, not just the respectable ones. There is nothing you can do about awakening. whatever you do will be the ego trying to add awakening or enlightenment to itself as its most prized possession, and thereby making itself more important and bigger. Instead of awakening, you add the concept of awakening to your mind, or the mental image of what an awakened or enlightened person is like, and then try to live up to that image. Living up to an image that you have of yourself or that other people have of you is inauthentic living, another unconscious role the ego plays. So if there is nothing you can do about awakening, if it has already happened or not yet happened, how can it be the primary purpose of your life? Does not purpose imply that you can do something about it? Only the first awakening, the first glimpse of consciousness without thought, happens by grace, without any doing on your part. If you find this book incomprehensible or meaningless, it has not yet happened to you. If something within you responds to it, however, if you somehow recognize the truth in it, it means the process of awakening has begun. Once it has done so, it cannot be reversed, although it can be delayed by the ego. For some people, the reading of this book will initiate the awakening process. For others, the function of this book is to help them recognize that they have already begun to awaken and to intensify and accelerate the process. Another function of this book is to help people recognize the ego within them whenever it tries to regain control and obscure the arising awareness. For some, the awakening happens as they suddenly become aware of the kinds of thoughts they habitually think, especially persistent negative thoughts that they may have been identified with all of their lives. Suddenly there is an awareness that is aware of thought but is not part of it. What is the relationship between awareness and thinking? Awareness is the space in which thoughts exist when that space has become conscious of itself. Once you have had a glimpse of awareness or presence, you know it firsthand. It is no longer just a concept in your mind. You can then make a conscious choice to be present rather than to indulge in useless thinking. You can invite presence into your life, that is to say, make space. With the grace of awakening comes responsibility. You can either try to go on as if nothing has happened, or you can see its significance and recognize the arising of awareness as the most important thing that can happen to you. Opening yourself to the emerging consciousness and bringing its light into this world then becomes the primary purpose of your life. I want to know the mind of God, Einstein said. The rest are details. What is the mind of God? Consciousness. What does it mean to know the mind of God? To be aware. What are the details? Your outer purpose, and whatever happens outwardly. So while you are perhaps still waiting for something significant to happen in your life, you may not realize that the most significant thing that can happen to a human being has already happened within you. The beginning of the separation process of thinking and awareness. Many people who are going through the early stages of the awakening process are no longer certain what their outer purpose is. What drives the world no longer drives them. Seeing the madness of our civilization so clearly, they may feel somewhat alienated from the culture around them. Some feel that they inhabit a no man's land between two worlds. They are no longer run by the ego, yet the arising awareness has not yet become fully integrated into their lives. Inner and outer purpose have not merged. So I think I'll leave it there for this episode. I would prefer to read on, as it seems it's in the midpoint of the discussion about outer purpose, but as I'm going through the pages there is a long passage ahead of us, so perhaps this is enough for the moment, the perhaps awareness of the alignment of inner and outer purpose. The primary purpose, the inner purpose, and understanding or discovering what our outer purpose is. So I can certainly relate to the being between two worlds that perhaps no longer fully run by the ego, that there is space there now, there is awareness of thoughts, there is a slight separation of thinking and awareness. But this has yet become fully integrated into one's life. That inner and outer purpose have not merged. Was a few lines about the change of outer purpose, the variability of it. And I'm just going to see if that comes up in my scanning of the passages we've read. No, it's not coming up here, but perhaps we can leave it at the point of where the inner purpose perhaps informs the outer purpose, which is why there is often so much change. We may start off in one type of outer purpose, and as the awakening process unfolds, then outer purpose begins to align with inner purpose, a change of career, or the people we interact and spend time with. But perhaps this will be revealed as we read on. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I wish you well, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.